Thanks, everyone. In 2017, Hurricane Maria swept through the Caribbean, causing massive destruction. And all of the agencies that went down there to help out were overwhelmed by almost unprecedented amount of damage that had been done. And they were struggling really how to prioritize their help. The Planetary Response Network, which is one of the organizations responsible for coordinating these efforts, decided to create a partnership to help. They went to Zooniverse, which is a citizen science platform. And by doing that, they were able to engage a worldwide workforce to help them to assess damage and help them to identify hotspots that really needed help. That partnership finally gave the response teams that little bit of effort that so they could act and control what it was they were doing. Earlier this year, when Dorian swept through the Bahamas, having learned the lessons of Maria, the Planetary Response Network already had their partnership in place. And so they were immediately able to start prioritizing and get control of a very chaotic situation. Now, I raise this as an example of partnership because I think it's important to understand that partnerships are not only commercial. I mean, they may be critical to a commercial thing, but partnerships are also very, very important to social impact. And you have to treat them the same way. You have to think about them. Right? The difficulty with all of this is that there are very, very few organizations, not-for-profits or commercial, who actually think strategically about their partnerships. Most partnerships are created out of an opportunity or a habit or in response to a short-term need. They're neither analyzed nor designed. Right? I may not know a lot of things, but I do know this is not the way to create a partnership. Unfortunately, the truth is, this is the way a lot of organizations create their partnerships. They take the best opportunity they've got and they go with it. Now, for the last 4 years, I've been working with organizations to help them to look at how they design their partnerships and assess their partnerships. And most of the tools that I've been using are around the business model canvas, accompanied with an analytical tool that was designed by a colleague of mine in Utrecht in the Netherlands, Bart Doornwert. So he has an analytical model that helps you to look at partnerships, and I'm going to walk you through that model as part of this presentation. And then I added a risk assessment tool to looking at the partnerships. But at last year's Intersection conference, and that was my first time at the Intersection conference, my imagination was sparked by what I was hearing about this framework and as a way to look at how enterprises are designed. And I began thinking in the interim to how do we frame this partnership assessment within the larger framework of the enterprise design. Now, I will confess, this is my own interpretation. I have not run this by the creators of the framework. And so if they have some disagreement with my interpretations, or if anybody comment or disagreement, I'm perfectly open to the discussion. But I want to show you my take on how you integrate a particular type of design within the larger framework of the enterprise design. And so there's two goals to this presentation. One is to show you the principles of the partnership design, and the second is to maybe spark your imagination so you can start thinking about how the work that you do fits within the enterprise design. So let's start with the stack. Right? So not all elements of the stack are going to be involved in this very particular subsection of enterprise design. So we're going to be selecting certain parts of it. Right? So we start with the architectural element. And that's, we're going to try to understand the role of the partner within the business design. And that's the first thing that we're going to look at. And then we switch down into, we're looking at a subset of actors who interact with the organization. And that's just who our potential partners are. But more importantly, at the anatomy level, we want to talk about what is the content that's being exchanged between the partners. Because fundamentally, a partnership is a reciprocal exchange of value. Right? Both sides in the partnership need to get value out of it, and you need to understand what's being transferred back and forth. One thing I've done here is that when you look at the descriptions of the content in the enterprise book and in some of the other documentation, it tends to focus mostly on the data or the information that's being exchanged between the organizations. But I would extend that to include the values that are being exchanged, especially when it comes to partnership. And so that value consideration is part of the content that you have to examine. From there, we start looking at the business frame, right? So what is it about this partnership? And how is it helping the business to deliver and its value to its customers, do its job? And along with that is understanding what is the function of this process. What are the motivations behind doing these exchanges, which are critical to understand. Finally, one of the things we'll look at is how do we create this interaction, right? So how are we designing the actual interaction to work? And then how do we do an evaluation of the performance of that? So what kind of things do we have to consider in the evaluation, right? And so that takes us through the 4 steps of the process of how you design and evaluate a partnership. So at the architecture level, we start thinking about the role of the partner inside of the business. So a partner will help your business in one of 2 ways. They will either be involved in your activities, or you could be outsourcing your activity to that partner. And alternately, they could be providing you with resources that you don't have in-house. And that may be physical, intellectual, or in the case of the hurricane response, actual workforce, an external workforce to help you to solve your problems, right? It's important to understand those activities and those resources because that's how you build. You build your value. That's how you create your communication channels. That's how you create your acquisition and retention strategies. And so a partner may be providing you in your marketing activities a particular channel that you might use to reach new customers or broaden who you can get. And so that's the dynamic of how the partner plays within the business. The last part of this is understanding that every partnership comes with a cost, right? It might be just a simple monetary cost, but it also might be time, and it might be the commitments that you have to fulfill as an organization come with a cost. And that's an important one. I'll talk a little bit later about that one. And it tends to be a trap sometimes for some organizations. So let's start with the process. So the first thing we need to do in the process is to understand, why is this partnership important? What is it that we're supposed to be getting out of this partnership? In the intent for a partnership, there are 4 reasons why you create a partnership. The first is for resources. Those things that you may not have inside of your company. If they're physical, you're human, might even be financial, you never know. Right? But these are resources that you don't have inside your company that you're hoping somebody's going to be able to provide you. The second reason for having a partnership is scale. So having this partner, you're now going to have access to a whole new market, a whole new set of customers, right? You may have an exterior workforce that you can now access, right? Scale whatever it is you're doing. The third reason is risk reduction. By being involved with this partner, you can reduce your own risks in the marketplace, right? The last one is social impact. This is the reason. So by being with this partner, they can help you have a better social impact in the world. I'm going to walk you through a few examples, an example of each of these, right? in the design process. So this is the model that was developed by my friend in Utrecht. Simple model, 4 elements, and those 4 elements will cover off the content and the interaction elements. The first thing that you want to understand about your business and design for your business, what is the created value, right? What is the outcome you're going to get for your business? And you think back to your motivations, right? Are we looking for more customers? Are we trying to find resources that we don't have? Do we want to create more social impact? So all those things we talked about at the functional level relate to the value that's created for your business. The second element is, what is that desired value? What do you want from that partner that you're going to use inside of your organization? The third element is, what offer of value are you giving back? Where's the reciprocation? What is your matching offer to the partner, right? The last element is the interaction, and this is the design part of this, is that in the center component, you are actually going to look at what is the dynamic of that exchange. Here's where you get into designing the interaction. How do we do this? How are we going to make this exchange work? So let me walk you through some examples, all right? Oh, I keep jumping ahead on you. 2 things to really understand. It's not just important, it's not your own business that you have to worry about when you look at partnerships. You also have to consider, what does it mean to the other partner's business? So if you want to design a good partnership, you not only have to understand the value that's created for your company, but you have to understand the value that's being created for them. Why are they? What's their motivation for getting into this partnership? Because if you've got a misalignment here, it can create some real problems within your partnerships. Right? So you don't want to look at this solely from your own business's perspective. You want to look at it from what values are going back and forth between why is this partner coming in, what are they looking for, what are we looking for, how can we make this match? And then how do we design the interaction to work? So now I'll get to some examples. So let's talk about scale. And here's an example of a partnership, Spotify and Facebook. Right? When Spotify first broke into the North American market, they were really struggling with getting adoption. Very popular in Europe at the time, but not really cracking the North American market. And they knew they needed a channel that would be very, very familiar to the American public. So from Spotify's perspective, they were looking for growth. They wanted scale, they wanted more customers, they wanted to launch into the North American market effectively. What they needed from their partners was a new channel to reach their fans. And what they were offering to a potential partner was a music library, huge resource of music that they had built. So what did this mean to Facebook? Well, if anybody knows Facebook, you know that they're always looking for new products and services that they can distribute to their people with the purpose of gathering more data. So they're looking for something that will generate data they don't already have so that they can sell that data to more advertisers. Right? So what Facebook was looking at, they wanted a music service, which they didn't have, and Spotify was interested in providing that. And what they offered in return was the Open Graph connection. So for Spotify, they said, well, not only will you give access to our customers, but we'll give you access to everyone our customers know because of the Open Graph. All the connection of their networks are available to you. So the nature of the interaction, obvious. How did the interaction actually work? And this is an interesting one because Facebook, all they did was make their API available. But for Spotify, they had to do all the programming, they had to build the interface, they had to build the dashboard that would be used inside of Facebook. They had all the costs. This was a one-sided cost deal. Facebook just said, hey, we got this API. Here, go, make us money. Right? That was about all they said. So you can see the dynamic here. Let's talk about a resource motivation. And this is the partnership between Adidas and Sennheiser. So you've got this big company, Adidas, and their motivation is to find new products for their accessories line. They're always looking for new things that they can sell to their athletes, make their brand, expand their brand, give them lots of revenue. What they were looking for was somebody with product expertise in a very specific area that any accessory line they didn't currently have, and they were offering in return the Adidas brand, the reach of their marketing, and their expertise in designing sport-related material. Now, it also so happened that this partnership arose just after Nike had created its partnership with Bose. So there was a little marketing pressure on Adidas to come up with something similar. From Sennheiser's perspective, right, they're always looking for new product and markets for their headphones. So they're looking for new customers, and Adidas can give them the new customers, give them all the access to the new customers that they want. And what they will offer in return is all that expertise to design headphones. Now, quite unlike the first example, the dynamic, the interaction that happened here was a joint venture. It was a co-design. So they created a joint venture, a separate company that designed these headphones. Sennheiser put in their experts on headphones, Adidas put in their experts on sports, and they came up with a design that was then sent back and marketed and branded by both companies. Right? So this was a very equivalent contribution in terms of the dynamic. Reducing your risk in the marketplace. Nespresso, one of the great business models of the 21st century, they were really interested in reducing their risk in the marketplace. Now, if anybody knows the Nespresso business model, it's a dual business line model. So they've split their business into two. They sell machines, which they sell broadly on a single transaction, and then the second business line is the pods. Now, the interesting fact about it is Nespresso does not make machines. Right? It's a single transaction. They want them out there as much as possible because they want people to be locked into buying their pods. Once you buy an espresso machine, you're locked into buying Nespresso pods. Right? So they want to reduce all of their costs around manufacturing, but also to access a retail distribution channel. Right? They don't want to sell machines. Right? Now, if you know the second half of this business model, they completely control the pods. They don't mind sharing a manufacturing sales channel over the machines and a one-time transaction, but you can only buy the pods from Nespresso. So they control what is the really lucrative part of that product. But when it came to the machines, they didn't want to have to spend a lot of money every time that they designed new machines to retool and remanufacture and take risks. So what they were looking for was a high-quality coffee machine manufacturer with an established retail chain. And what they offered in back was the Nespresso brand, all the customers for Nespresso, and the patents for machines, all the R&D for a new machine already done. And as we all know, the most expensive part of any product management is R&D, is getting it all up and done. So Krups, a manufacturing sales company, is always looking for new markets. So for them, what they were going to get from Nespresso was increased sales without having to invest in R&D. Nespresso would do all the R&D and then hand you the patent. All you have to do is manufacture it. right? What they offered in return was established production facilities and an established distribution channel worldwide. And so the mechanism for this partnership, manufacturing licensing agreements that had revenue sharing and it had whatever the costs were going to be, who had responsibilities for what. Now, the interesting aspect of this is that Krups is one of 8 companies that Nespresso has agreements with for manufacturing their machines. So they have further reduced their risk by distributing their manufacturing across 8 partners. So if any one partner decides, well, we want to up our costs, we don't want to do this, Nespresso just says, fine, we're moving to the other partner. You're out, right? So by managing these, having multiple partners, they've completely reduced their risk. And so when they have to do something like, one of the things they have to do in North America, because North Americans are not used to drinking little cups of coffee. I'm sorry. You get really, it's not so bad in Canada, but if you go down to the United States, you really have a hard time finding an espresso machine in most places and drinking a small cup of coffee. So Nespresso created the virtual line, ostensibly for North America, which produces large cups of coffee. Right? North American sized cups of coffee, and it's a completely different machine than the normal Nespresso machine. Anyways, I don't want to go too long on that. So social impact. This is a case study of one of my absolute favorite companies in the world. It's a craft brewing company that is just outside of Ottawa, and it is one of the most inventive companies I've ever had the pleasure to work with and to know. So they're a licensed B Corp, so they are a beneficial corporation, and in Canada, that gives you tax breaks. So you get certain tax breaks based on being a B Corp. Right? And B Corps, they're beneficial to the community, and they have a lot of stringent rules around how they interact with their staff. There's a lot of rules around how you support and deal with your staff, as well as your interaction in the community. So Bose Beer has this motivation under their B Corp to involve themselves in the community. So they're looking for a way to increase their sales because, hey, they're a beer company. They want to sell beer. But they also want to access new customers and fulfill their B Corp responsibilities. So they were looking for an organization that would provide operational support for a social program, and in return, they would offer the brand, they would offer the product, and they would offer a resource from customers. So the people they went and created a partnership with is called Operation Come Home. And Operation Come Home is an organization that deals with street kids, homeless kids that are on the street. And they provide them shelters, they try to get them into education programs, they try to find them employment, but they're always struggling for money. And so Operation Come Home said, well, you know what? We need a new revenue stream somehow. So what we will do is, we're going to connect with you because we think that you can motivate people to donate to us because of your beer products. And what we will do is, we will give you all the staff to help you to run this program. So the way this program works is, you go on the website for Bose Beer, you order your beer to be delivered through the Operation Come Home program, and that will take you down, and then when the beer's ready to go, Operation Come Home will arrive with some students, some young people to do the physical lifting, and supervisors who drive the delivery truck. They deliver it to your house. There's a $15 surcharge. So Bose sells its beer, the $15 surcharge goes to the Operation Come Home, and the person who's buying the beer gets a $10 tax credit for donating. So it's really a good program. But the issue here with this kind of partnership, it's a joint venture, but you have to understand, as a social impact group, you're not going to, you don't want to be doing the work, The commercial company doesn't want to be doing the work of the social impact. They want somebody to do that work for them. It's not within their business to deliver beer to homes. So you have to understand that dividing line between whose responsibilities. But this has been an astoundingly successful program. So now that we've gone through this process of understanding and designing what the value exchange is and what the credits are, we need to compare this. We need to understand what's the dynamic here. And so the first question we ask ourselves about the operational end of things is, are they providing us really what we need? Right? Negotiations often with partners, people will say yes, 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 and then when it's time they go, well, I'm not really sure I want to do that, or that's not what I meant. And so it's very important in the negotiation part of the partnership that you be very clear on what stuff is being exchanged. The second question is, are we providing what they want? And that becomes very important, especially if you're a not-for-profit, because often partnerships for sponsorship, you suddenly find yourself going, what? What did we say we would give them? As a president of a former not-for-profit organization, when my marketing guy came to me and said, hey, we got this great sponsorship and here it is, and I went, whoa, right? Because the third question, is this agreeable? Is it effective? Can we afford it? There's a lot of organizations who do things like sponsorship and they don't realize that the cost of servicing that sponsorship, remember the cost related to the partner, exceeds what you get in the partnership. So you need to do this analysis in advance to make sure that what you're doing is affordable. And I'm sure Spotify had to do a lot of consideration over the costs of building all of this stuff before they entered that partnership. So this is how we go about looking at that. Finally, evaluate, right? There are 4 important questions that you have to ask yourself about your partnership. The first one is, how strategically important is this partnership to us, right? Can we do without it? Is it nice to have, or is it critical? So if we look at a major partnership that happened years ago, Apple and Chapters Indigo, which is a bookstore, they put a store in store. So you had an Apple store inside of Chapters Indigo. As far as Apple was concerned, this was a nice to have. It really didn't affect their business model all that much. For Chapters, it was a real enticement to bring people in. So you may be looking at it being a very low risk for Apple and a kind of medium to higher risk. But look at the relationship between Samsung and Apple. These are 2 companies that spend hundreds of millions of dollars suing each other every year. They are constantly in court suing each other, and yet they are major partners in production. Why? Samsung makes the chips that are in your iPhone. And so there's a tight relationship. There's a critical relationship to them. It's a huge business for Samsung, and it's a critical partner for Apple. So you need to understand this dynamic. And the more you look at how critical this partner is to you, the higher your risk. Is your partner a competitor? Is there potential for your partner to enter the marketplace and be a competitor of yours? And there's a very famous example of Dell computers and ASUS. Right? So in the early years, the Dell business model is really cool because the manufacturing model is supply chain, manufacturing, inventory, sales, distribution. Except Dell's business model was marketing, sales, manufacturing, distribution. They sold their products before they ever built them. So they had this relationship with ASUS, and ASUS said to what they were originally just buying from ASUS was chips. And ASUS came back to them and said, look, we're a manufacturing company. We'll make the boards for you, for your company. It'll take stuff off your inventory. You'll be more profitable. Dell looked at their books and they went, yeah, sure, right? We'll do that. And then a little while later, ASUS came back and said, look, we're building computers. Why don't we just build a computer for you and send you the whole computer? Dell did the usual MBA stuff and said, yep, this is going to make us more profitable. Their shares went up. Then ASUS came back and said, hey, look, we've got a distribution system. It doesn't make sense for us to ship your computer to you so that you can ship the computer to the customer. Just give us the information. We'll ship directly to the customer. Made perfect sense to Dell. And then ASUS came back again, only this time, ASUS didn't come back to Dell. ASUS went to Best Buy and said, why are you selling Dell computers? We make them. And we can sell the same computer to you under your brand or our brand for 40% less than what Dell is selling them to you for. Guess what's not sold at Dell anymore, or at Best Buy computers anymore? Dell's business took a huge nosedive when ASUS cut them out, right? Partner who enters as a competitor. You have to understand what the risk is of those things. The last question is, to what degree are you integrated? Are you loosely integrated or tightly integrated? So let's go back to the mid-2000s, right? Apple, up until the mid-2000s, all Apple computers used the Motorola chip. By far a better chip than Intel could ever hope to be. But at the end of the 1990s, Apple was in some serious trouble. They were a product-oriented company whose products were not selling all that well. They were very expensive. And so they wooed Steve Jobs to come back to Apple. One of the things that Steve Jobs did was he negotiated a huge influx of money from Microsoft. There were two reciprocal values in that partnership. They got money from Microsoft. What Microsoft got was a commitment that Apple would always support Microsoft Office. So even though Apple had their own presentation software and word processor and spreadsheet, Apple would always support Microsoft Office. And the second part of it was they had to switch their chips. They had to move from Motorola to Microsoft's partner, Intel. So in 2005, Apple switched their computers from Motorola chips to Intel chips and released them in 2006. Now, was this a major effort? Was Apple tightly tied to Motorola? No, right? Just change the chips, a few small adjustments to the computer, we're good to go. Microsoft helped us with the operating system adjustments. But for Motorola, who were tightly tied to Apple, it almost killed their chip business. Motorola, for the longest time, the only chip business they had was in appliances. But now with the rise of IoT, they're finally seeing some new growth in what they're doing. But there you see the ties. So, and how hard would it be to find a substitute? Right, this is the last question. And what we're doing here is, so Apple, in 2012, Apple can actually control only 17% of the cell phone market. But they made 75% of the profits in the business. Why? Because of their partner, Foxconn. Right? Foxconn was producing all of the stuff at a much lower rate. So through Tim Cook, who was managing the supply chain, reduced the cost of goods from 76% to 52% over 10 years because of his partnership with Foxconn. But what you've got is a company like Apple who are tremendously proud of their public image and really concerned about it, who has a partnership with a slave labor camp. Right? How does Apple justify it? The question has always been, why is Apple continuing to be involved with Foxconn when the horrible publicity that's generated by that? And the reason is, there's no substitute. There is nobody in the world who can produce the goods at the costs that Foxconn does. And Apple is addicted to those profits. Now, apparently there's a lot of research going into moving some of the Apple stuff into India. But that's the nature of this. There's no substitute for this. So what we do is we have this little one-pager assessment tool that looks at the 4 questions, taking you from the low to the high. And when you're assessing your partnership, when you start getting up towards those high numbers, you better start developing mitigation strategies. So there you have the process for designing a partnership within the context of how you do enterprise design. And I absolutely loved the exercise of trying to mix these two together. Thank you all. Do we have any time for questions? Okay, so we have some time for questions if people would like to ask some questions.
this is the time for exactly that.
I really enjoyed your presentation. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And what I'm going to make is a very classic question. You have the perfect match, side by side, but then execution, boom.
Yeah, that's why it's so important to do that assessment of, and it's an ongoing assessment. It's not, right? So as you do the compare part of that, the operationalization of that workshop, that can't be a one-time assessment. Every so often you have to go back and revisit that partnership to make sure that it's still an effective and an affordable partnership.
So any lessons learned or any advice based on what you have done for people that are, well, companies in this case, of course?
The biggest advice I have for companies is to really understand what your motivation is and what their motivation is, because the rest of it falls out from that. If you don't understand what values are really being exchanged, because there's that tie between what your ambition is for having a partner and what you're actually going to get from them, that's probably the biggest source of the problem, right? That's where it starts to go wrong. And so you have to get that right before you can proceed with that. So understanding motivations and understanding the specifics that are being exchanged as value.
Hi, yeah, great presentation, partly because this space is an area I'm working in at the moment. So what's your view on, partnerships and outsourcing and the relationship between those lenses, if you like? When does an outsource situation really turn into a partnership, or whether it's purely an arm's length relationship as a supplier?
Well, I think both of them are essentially partnerships. They're different scale of partnership, right? So if you're outsourcing it and somebody's doing it completely away from you and then sending you the final resource back, then that's one type of partnership. But when they're actually outsourcing and they're integrated into your production, that's a much more complicated partnership. But they are both partnerships. And one of the things that Bart and I have a disagreement over is Bart looks at things, he says, if there's a monetary component to it, then it's not really a partnership, it's a supplier. I'm not so sure about that, because as far as I'm concerned, money is a value just like any other value. And so the exchange. But when it comes to outsourcing, right, the more you outsource, you have to look at your whole business model, right? And that's why you have to consider what that partner is doing for you, because if you're outsourcing activities to them or the creation of a resource, then you may be losing that functionality within your own company. And I have seen companies who have outsourced so much of their business, they no longer have a business, right? They get really critically dependent upon their partner, and then something happens with that partnership and they're left high and dry, or else they have to negotiate a new partnership at a much higher level of cost. So there's your risks around the outsourcing of it, right? You have to make sure that you're very clear as to whether it's a complete outsource or an integration into your activities. And then once that's done, be fully aware of what you're doing to your business model by outsourcing this. This is a lot of American companies. The US, they lament how much stuff has been sent overseas. They kill their own businesses. Any other questions? Comments? Somebody want to tell me I'm full of it? Well, thank you very much. I appreciated your listening.